There isn't a single country in the world without debt. The superpower United States has surpassed $38 trillion of debt, making it the most indebted country in history. The European Union carries around $14 trillion, and Japan nearly $9 trillion. Even oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia or export giants like Germany and China carry massive amounts of debt. But this raises one simple question. If everyone is in debt, then who exactly are we indebted to? The answer lies in our video. In a world where money, power, and history intertwine, nothing is as simple as it seems. Debt isn't just a burden like most people think. It is actually the backbone of the modern financial system. Behind every war, every crisis, every economic boom and collapse lies this invisible structure of debt. And as you follow this chain of debt long enough, an uncomfortable truth emerges. The world isn't really indebted to anyone. It is indebted only to itself. Of course, this doesn't mean everyone earns the same amount of money from it. Today, the total global debt is over $315 trillion. That's almost 3 times the size of the global economy. To understand how we got to this point, we need to start the story from the very beginning. Before credit cards existed, before digital money transfers were even imaginable, nations were borrowing on the battlefield. In 1694, England was at war with France, and the country's gold reserves were nearly exhausted. The king turned to merchants for help. The state promised to pay interest from future taxes in exchange for borrowing money. Merchants provided the funds the crown desperately needed. To manage this system, the Bank of England was founded. For its time, this was revolutionary. The state could now spend money it did not yet have. Lenders received government-backed notes as guarantees. These notes became tradable. This event laid the foundation for today's government bonds. France copied the idea, the Netherlands perfected it, and the newly founded United States adopted it to finance its revolution. Thus, national debt became a symbol of strength, not failure or crisis. Empires once conquered land for gold. Now they issue bonds for interest. The battlefield was replaced by the balance sheet. The U.S. owes $38 trillion. Japan owes over $9 trillion. And global debt increases by about $1 trillion every 100 days. Everyone owes money. Everyone lends money. Everyone is both a borrower and a lender. So who is on the other side of this equation? About half of the U.S.'s $38 trillion is owed to investors. Most of these investors are Americans themselves, banks, pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, and the Federal Reserve. Around $9 trillion is owed to foreign countries. The 2 largest creditors are Japan, $1 trillion, and China, $800 billion. After them come the UK, Luxembourg, and Belgium. So the statement, America owes money to China, is true, but it only accounts for about 2% of America's total debt. Here's what really happens. The Treasury issues bonds. American institutions buy them. The Fed buys them back and prints new money. The interest paid through taxes flows back into American retirement accounts. Like a wheel that never stops turning. The debt is real, but the lenders are mostly part of the same system. And borrowing isn't unique to the United States. Japan buys U.S. bonds. The U.S. lends money to Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing countries through the World Bank. Those countries invest their foreign reserves back into U.S. and European bonds. Everyone becomes both a debtor and a creditor. It's like a giant game of hot potato. except the potato is made of promises. Behind government bonds stand huge funds, banks and central banks. These institutions manage trillions of dollars and decide which countries can borrow cheaply. When confidence collapses, currencies fall and governments can collapse. Democracy decides who governs, but markets decide who survives. Central banks don't just manage debt, they create it. When they buy bonds, they can print new money. Every dollar in circulation is a debt record somewhere else. Debt-free money does not exist. In 2010, Greece couldn't pay its debt. Interest rates skyrocketed. The ECB and IMF intervened, but at a heavy price: higher taxes, spending cuts, and record unemployment. In Argentina, repeated defaults turned debt into a national trauma. In Sri Lanka, unpaid debt triggered fuel shortages and political collapse. When the system collapses, the creditors behind the curtain suddenly appear. The IMF, rating agencies, giant funds, and they get what they want. So why don't governments ever finish paying their debt? Because the entire system is built on this. Governments don't borrow to pay off debt. They borrow to roll it over. New debt is taken to pay old debt. Economists call this refinancing. Interest is the rent paid for stability. The U.S. will never bring its debt to zero. Japan has been rolling over its debt, exceeding 250% of its GDP, for decades. Investors don't expect repayment. They expect the deal to continue. Government bonds are the safest asset in the world. If the U.S. paid off all its debt, the global financial system would collapse. That's why governments manage debt instead of eliminating it. Politicians saying, "We will eliminate the debt," are not being realistic. It will never be believable. The goal isn't to erase debt, it's to maintain confidence. Because once confidence disappears, the system must collapse. So who do we actually pay our debts to? The line, "we owe it to ourselves," is not completely true. Interest payments always flow upward. Taxpayers pay, financial institutions profit. This is why, as debt grows, inequality also grows. There is no single party responsible. Not China, not the IMF, not Wall Street, all of them. And, in a way, all of us. Debt has essentially replaced money in this era. Governments create debt, banks expand it, investors trade it, and we live in a system built on trust in this cycle. Debt was once a chain. Today it is a balancing mechanism. But if this balance breaks, if trust vanishes, the illusion collapses. And we remember what debt truly is: a promise that cannot last forever.